Welcome from the National Foreign Language Center at the University of Maryland. My name is Thomas Sauer, and I'm thrilled you're joining us once again on this second day of the NFLC Virtual Summit, Apart But Together, where we highlight presenters from the 5 regional language associations as well as ACTFL. We hope you find value in the pre-recorded sessions that are released twice a day at 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. Eastern Time. If you missed one, don't worry. All sessions will be available on the NFLC YouTube channel until August 31st. All of the live stream sessions are also recorded and will be available via YouTube until that date. This includes the panel discussions, the student panels, the sunset chat, and the featured speakers. And now I couldn't be more excited to introduce our next featured speaker. Her session on fostering spontaneous oral language production stirred a lot of discussion this morning, and speaking from personal experience, I'm confident so will her featured talk this afternoon. Please welcome Katrina Griffin, a German teacher from Maryland and former ACTFL Teacher of the Year. The title of her talk this afternoon, See Us as Humans, has me excited by what we are about to hear. Welcome, Katrina.
Thank you. I want to thank the NFLC for inviting me to speak about student engagement today. When I think about engaging learners, I can't help but see students in classrooms. I see a second grader cheating on their reading comprehension test. And when the teacher catches them, they just learn to cheat a little bit better because they know that getting the answers right and getting a good grade is more important to the adults than the actual learning. I see a 4th grader who has stopped doing their spelling homework because writing lists of words out of context is boring. I see a 7th grader standing in the hallway crying hysterically because for the first time in their life, they're failing math. The teacher just keeps going and covering material even though the students aren't with him because there's so much for him to cover. I see the language student in college who just really loves learning about the culture of the country and isn't too interested in the language. When their professor pulls them aside and tells them that they need to try a little bit harder and work on their grammar, that student tells them, don't worry, I'm never going to use this language anyway. Those aren't the stories of random kids that I've met. Those are my personal stories. So when my students tell me that they don't understand why they need to learn a language other than English, I can empathize because I felt the same way. And that's the lens that I carry with me into my own classroom. I sometimes hear teachers and adults talk about kids who don't want to be in their classes and reluctant learners. And I have to say, if a kid doesn't want to be in your class, they're not coming. The students who don't want to come to my class walk right on by and go to the 7-Eleven. And I don't believe that we have reluctant learners. I think we have some students who are disengaged from the value and purpose of learning, and perhaps disengaged from the value and purpose of learning a language. Our students have learned a great deal of things before they've come to us. Things just went awry somewhere. As a department chairperson, I have the opportunity to visit many classrooms. Last year, I was able to visit almost 50 public and private school classrooms. I saw English classes, language classes, I saw social studies classes, 5th grade math classes, and even a class on boat making. And what becomes evident when you visit that many classrooms is that there is a clear difference between compliant learners and engaged learners. Learners who are engaged with their instructors in deep, meaningful tasks are able to make their learning visible to themselves and to everyone around them. They are not just regurgitating facts and information. When I think back to the 5th grade math class that I watched, I can still see that teacher. I can hear the pre-planned questions that she made. I can see how intentionally she grouped her students so that everyone in her classroom had a voice. The boat making class was so engaging that I can still tell you why patterns are so important in boat making and in life in general. When we talked to that teacher after his class, he could not stop gushing about his students and what they were doing and where they were going to go later in life, what jobs they were going to have, making boats. He begged us to come back and see him again, not so that we could watch him teach more, so that we could meet more of his beloved students. Now, you know from your experiences and from research from people like John Hattie that student-teacher relationships are one of the most important things in the classroom. It's more important than homework, than collaboration, than feedback. You might have heard the expression, if you can't capture their hearts, you can't educate their minds. I'll say it again. If you can't capture their hearts, you can't educate their minds. But how do we do that? It's a question that we ask teachers when they apply for jobs. How are you going to build student-teacher relationships? I hear a lot of very similar answers. Teachers say that they find out their student interest, they attend events, they give their students surveys so they know what's going on. But what I never hear, and that I really want to hear, is I try to know as much about my students as humanly possible. I want to know everything that I can about my students, because that's what it takes. When you think about your students, I want you to think about learning about your students is similar to learning about the culture of a country. And I think you might have heard culture referred to as an iceberg, where at the tippy top, you have the country's food, artwork, places of interest, mannerisms. And underneath the surface, you see the real perspectives. That's the real culture of the country. I want you to think about your students the same way. At the tippy top, you have their interests, likes, and dislikes. And underneath the surface, you have their worldview, their perspectives, the things that are really going to inform you about your students. It's one thing to know that Brandon plays lacrosse. It's another thing to know that Brandon has 3 siblings and 1 computer. That's going to inform how I interact with Brandon. We did something with ELL learners at our school called, we did something with ELL learners called If You Really Knew Me, Then You Would Know. And in those student share-outs, we found out really interesting information about kids, that they were sad or lonely, they weren't living with their parents, they hadn't seen their parents in years, they might have ridden the death train to get here, or that they were really excited to be coming to school every day. It was such an informative process that it's something that I brought back to my classroom. So each and every day, we start class in English, and I ask them, what do I need to know about you today? Students share with me all kinds of information. That they'll tell me that they were up all night with a parent at the hospital, that they're not feeling well, that they're stressed, that they have a test next class, that they're fine, or that they're tired, so tired because school starts so early. This information doesn't change my goals and expectations for students, but it does change how I interact with them. And maybe students need more support, or maybe they need more space. Maybe I need to change the timing of some of the things that I've planned for the day. Now, sometimes I start the shares because, as you know, connecting with other human beings requires us to be vulnerable. So sometimes I'll share that I've woken up with a headache and I still have one and I just don't feel like myself. Or that there's a lot going on at home and it's just running through my mind and I'm having trouble concentrating. And I'll ask if students have felt that way too. Most students can relate. They know that I am trying to connect with them and know everything about them because I explicitly ask them on a daily basis. Now, I wasn't sure the impact that these conversations were having until one day this year, my AP students came to me. They came to class and they looked very stressed out. So I said, what do I need to know about you today? And they said, well, Frau Griffin, we have this new English teacher and we just came from her and it's not going well. They said, she believes in tough love. And a student said, I'm getting a lot of the tough, but I'm not getting a lot of the love. A lot of our teachers aren't like you, Frau Griffin. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? Because if I'm doing something well, I need to know what it is so that I keep doing it. And they said, well, a lot of teachers just treat us like little robots who show up to do the work. We come into class, they tell us what to do, we're supposed to do it, and they don't really talk to us or interact with us. You actually treat us like human beings. You actually treat us like human beings. I'll let that sink in. What must it feel like to come to school every day and feel like your teachers don't see you? Yet that is largely the experience that my students are having. If engaging students is that you need to have student-teacher relationships in order to engage students, we also need to start asking, what are we asking students to do while they're in class with us? Is it meaningful? Is it purposeful? Does it transfer outside of our classrooms? What if my student never continues learning a language beyond today? What am I doing to benefit them right now in this present moment and in the future? Now, when I first started teaching, I only had 3 sections of German. And I thought that we needed to have a lot of fun in class so that I could build my program. I didn't want to scare kids away. So we did lots of fun things. We dressed up, we played games. I turned my classroom into a Halloween graveyard. We did the ubiquitous House of Dreams project and catalog projects, which were basically little more than art projects with some German words sprinkled in. In my mind, if my students couldn't do simple things like memorizing vocabulary, how would they ever do anything greater with the language? When my German 1 students used to write on their goal sheets that they wanted to be able to have a conversation at the end of German 1, I used to laugh a little in my head and think, it's not going to happen. Looking back, I realized that I was sending a message to my students. The message was that they couldn't do hard things. It wasn't my intention, but by not challenging my students and pushing them out of their comfort zones and me out of mine, I was limiting their potential. Now, my colleague and I decided to make a shift. I guess we did what Rebecca Bluewolf refers to as Marie Kondoing our lessons, and that's just what we did. So the House of Dreams project became a presentational writing task on where's the best place to hang out with your friends. Instead of teaching ordinal numbers and telling students how to say what their birthday is and drawing a family tree, we now ask students to debate in German 1, who gives you the best gift? Is it better to give or receive a gift? When German 3 students watch a movie, for example, The Miracle of Bern, they don't do multiple choice questions to check for understanding or picture sequence matching. They do a Socratic seminar, and they talk about, is the father in the film a good father? What does it mean to be a good parent? How can you decide if someone is a good parent? Who gets to make that call? These are vastly more complex tasks that require greater language production from students and much more critical thinking. My students have to trust me in my belief that they can do hard things, and they have to trust that I will give them the supports they need to accomplish that. And I would argue that students can do hard things and they want to do hard things. You might have heard that yesterday in the panel with Rebecca Aubrey. It's really important to connect students to what they're doing now and make them feel a connection in the present moment, as opposed to something that they can't see yet, like perhaps traveling abroad, or in my case, becoming a foreign language teacher. We didn't just change what we were doing with students in class, we started engaging them in the planning process. You've heard that students need voice and choice in the classroom. And I think a lot of us think about things like choice boards. I see choice boards on one end of the spectrum. They're really great. They do give students choice, but a lot of times they're teacher designed and directed. On the other end of the spectrum, you have something like involving students in the curriculum. What would students say if you gave them the opportunity to tell you what they wanted to learn? What would they want to discover and talk about? Now, I don't have carte blanche to change the whole curriculum of all the languages in my school. That's not up to me. But we can tweak things and change how we look at them to better meet the needs of our students. I remember a time when my Spanish teachers and students were struggling with a unit they were required to teach on camping. Now, my school is pretty close to Baltimore City, so students at my school have no relationship with camping. They've never been camping. They have no connection to that. So by talking to students, we decided to tweak that and have them talk about how their natural environment shapes their interests and activities. Even if you can't control what you're teaching, you can control how you teach. And when we start a new unit, we share with students what the essential questions are, what the end assessment is going to be, and everything in between. That's what we do on the first day. And then we get their input on, what do you think about the order? What do you think about this essential question? Is there anything that you want to change? When we did this in German 3 one year, I proposed that we do a Socratic seminar as our final assessment in German 3. They were a little nervous about this idea, but we talked through it and we incorporated some things that were going to make them feel better about doing that task at the end. They also helped me craft questions that they were going to talk about in that Socratic seminar. They had much more ownership and engagement in the whole learning process because they were involved all the steps of the way. Now, the third vital step of engaging your students is about building your team. I can't possibly know everything there is to know about my students without talking to their previous teachers, or maybe teachers that they have in other classes. I also need my team to help me craft better lessons. I have blind spots, and I need their help to help me craft more engaging things for my students. We need to work together. So in my department, we meet in same language level grouping like Spanish 2, very homogeneous. We do vertical teaming where we talk about the things that we do in the various levels of our languages so that we know what's happening the whole way through. We also plan across languages. It is not surprising to see my AP French teacher sitting with the AP Spanish teachers planning units. And it's not a surprise when things come out of the printer and I think that they're for German 1, but they're really for Spanish 1. Now, I've done some sessions on collaboration, and there's a question that keeps coming up that I haven't really quite answered very well. And that question is, how do you plan meaningful lessons if you don't have that much time to do it? In our case, we have 1 hour every week to plan lessons. And I've done some thinking, and the truth is, it takes us more than an hour. That's not the answer you probably wanted to hear. But stay with me. When I thought about it, I realized that in my department, we don't have me time. We have we time. And my department spends a lot of the time together. My teachers meet each other in the hallway in the morning with their coffee and tea. They talk to each other and get silly and greet students. They meet up with each other on their free periods, and we have lunch together almost every day. And in all of those informal meetings, teachers are talking about students, sharing information, reflecting on their practices. So by the time we get to that formal meeting once a week, they're really just fine-tuning what they've done. We have built a strong unit of teachers at my school. What's the result of that? Well, if 20 years ago, I only had 3 sections of German and the program at the middle school had been cut, this year we have 11 sections of German. There's a program at the middle school, and they've built one at the elementary school. 1 year, the AP Spanish numbers jumped from 15 students to 85 students. And our administrator thought that there was a problem with his computer. We recently got a new French teacher, and in just 2 years, she's taken the AP French numbers from 4 students to 17 students. Before she met us and worked with our department, she was teaching out of a textbook. All of this growth in student numbers has also helped us develop better student output. We're asking more of students. We are better educators. And this is all based on our relationships with students and our relationships with each other as educators. Now, this spring was a pretty trying time for both students and educators. I'm sure you'll agree. And so I decided to write each and every one of my students a postcard. It ended up being a test in how well I knew each student. How personal could I make their messages? Are you still watching videos of people unboxing toasters on the internet? Is your little sister driving you crazy? I'm glad to hear that you aren't stuck in Mexico anymore. Unsurprisingly, many students reached out and said that my postcard was the first that they had ever received. A lot of students were happy that I'd reached out and wondered why other teachers hadn't done the same. At the end of June, I got one letter sent to my house, and that letter started, "Dear Frau Griffin, thank you for seeing your students as humans. It pains me that my students feel like they have to thank me for treating them like human beings. And it makes me wonder what is happening with their other teachers." So my challenge to you is, how are you seeing your students? And how is that reflected back to you? How are you including your students in planning for their learning? How do your actions and interactions with students communicate that you care about them more than you care about your content? And finally, what will you say or do the next time a student asks you or tells you that they don't need your class? Thank you.